Okay, shalom, my friends. We're going now to begin with the sixth part of, the fifth. That's lecture number 5, which we call Yishmael and Redemption, part 5. Which means we are talking further into the final redemption of the Jewish people, the Messianic era, the time of the coming of the Mashiach, or as we call today, in the words of our sages and especially the Kabbalah, today is called Ikveta Dimshicha, the footsteps of the Mashiach, which means we are getting closer to the coming of the Mashiach. In Kabbalah terms, this generation is considered to be the Akevim, the hills. If you wish, I can explain this. Since the time of the creation, the Jewish people believe very much in the statement made by our sages that the older, the more ancient is the generation, the more superior the minds were. It is true, it stands in total contradiction to our humble understanding with this generation. Because if we say that in the very beginning those were the superior minds, it means that today those are the most inferior minds. I did mention this statement many times in the past. It says in the Talmud, Im rishonim kemalachim, anachnu kibnei adam, ve'im rishonim kibnei adam, anachnu kechamorim. This is how our sages analyzed the difference of the generations when we are talking about the minds of people. The early ones, the time of David, Solomon, Moshe, Yoshua, if we consider them, that their minds were like the minds of an angel, which is very vast, then we can consider ourselves as normal human beings. But if we consider them as normal human beings, then we are not even considered as donkeys. I mean, we are like donkeys. Don't be hurt, don't be offended. Because it's possible that regarding this philosophical statement, today we don't even talk about that kind of donkey. Because the Talmud says, va'afilu lo kechamoro shel Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. We are not even like the chamor of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Who is the chamor? You know the story, remember? That donkey which refused to work on Shabbat? That's a story that happened over 2,000 years ago. The father-in-law of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he had a donkey, and normally he worked with it every day except Shabbat. So the donkey became habituated into not working on Shabbat. So one day when he sold it to a goy, the donkey worked like a charm during all 6 days. Then comes the 7th day, he stopped. The goy didn't understand. He brought it back to Rabbi Pinchas. And Rabbi Pinchas, this story also is known in a different way as Yochanan ben Torta, that in fact it was a cow, the cow of Ben Torta, which refused also to work. But that's not the point. The point is that he was habituated not to work on Shabbat. He refused to work on Shabbat. An animal. So if Jews do not know their own nature, their own inheritance, when they don't keep Shabbat, for example, so they are considered less than Behema in that kind of understanding. So our sages said that the mind of the early ones was superior to ours. Very, very big difference, very, very big distinction. Of course, non-religious people will never believe in this because, listen, what is the generation that produced more inventions and more intelligence than this generation? This generation is known to be the generation of the greatest minds. But the truth is that we can understand that statement by our sages if we say that then anyway everything is relative. We stand on the shoulders of giants. There is no invention that is not based on an earlier hypothesis of some kind. Everything is based on something before. Nothing came out by itself. So therefore, what's more important, the basis or the result of the basis? Of course, without the basis you have no result. So that means that the basis is more important. So that's how we look upon the earlier generation. The ancient generations are the basis of everything. Since we are only the product of that basics, so automatically we are considered to be just a small fraction of the early one, of the basis. Because without basis we wouldn't be here. That's one way how to understand what I am saying. In relation to what? So today we are in that generation that we call, according to Kabbalah, the heels, akevim, the heels of a human being. Where do you find the heel? That's the lower part of the body. You understand that? Kabbalah teaches us, and you could say this, that this is a Kabbalistical philosophy, that in the early times, since the time of creation, the world was going through what we call tikkun, a certain fixation. Something has to be fixed. Nothing is perfect after the sin of Adam Arishon, for example. And everything requires perfection. Everything requires fixing. Well, we can understand it in many ways, but that's not the issue. According to Kabbalah, the early times were considered the head, and then later on, the torso, the body, and then the lower part of the body, which apparently is the Middle Ages. That's about 1,000 years ago. And then when we arrive to our generation, we finally reach the akevim, the heels, the bottom part of the feet. How would you analyze mathematically that lower part of the body? You could say it is the most important, or you could say it is the lower in importance, the lowest in importance. I want you to think about this. If somebody will give you the heels of a person, the feet, the bottom part of the feet, and he will tell you, analyze it. Well, how would you call it? The most important part of the body, or the lightest part of the body, which means the less important?
It's necessary.
Wait a minute. I said to analyze it in both ways. How would we regard it? As the most important or the least important? There are those who would say, come on, we're talking about the lower part of the feet. That's inferior. That's nothing. Compared to the head, can you compare it to the brain? Can you compare it to the eyes? Can you compare it to the mind? Can you compare it to the chest? And so forth. So everyone, automatically you would say, of course, the lower part of the body is lower. But others would say, no, because the heels are the most important, because the whole body is sustained and established on it. You cannot stand without it. So therefore you need the feet to be a human being, to stand erect. So that's how we could look at this question if we pose it as what is the philosophical analysis of that which we call in Hebrew akevim. Akevim, again, is the hills. So some people would regard it as the lowest part, or some people would practically find in it the most important part, because the whole body stands on it. That's why in Kabbalah they regard the last generation before the redemption as the akevim, the hills of all the generations. In a Talmudical statement, it's called ikveta dimshicha, which we normally translate to the footsteps of the Mashiach, which means the threshold of going into the Mashiach. That's okay. We need music. So you understand that? But if we look into the Kabbalah, we see that the reason why the Talmud calls it ikveta, which means in the footsteps, the Kabbalah calls it practically the footsteps. So now if it is the footsteps, so we either consider this generation as the lowest generation because it is symbolized by the hills, or maybe we should regard it as the most important generation of all the generations. Why? Because all the generations stand on it. We are the hill, but the whole body stands on it. And we said that since the time of the creation, the tikkun, the fixing of the world, begins first with the upper part of the body, the head, then the torso, then the lower part, and then the feet. Now we have reached that which is called in Kabbalah terms the feet, the lower feet. So now we understand. So I am sorry if I introduced here a little piece of Kabbalah that has to do with today's, but it helps to understand more the big question. And what is the big question? How dare we say that which I said before? How dare we say that this is the lowest generation, the most inferior generation, when this is the generation that produced so much more than any other generation before? At the same time, it is the generation, that's what we are told, that this generation is the generation that is going to see the Mashiach. So those generations before us who were immensely better than us did not have the merit to see the Mashiach. We will see the Mashiach. So how dare you call us inferior? So the answer is exactly as in perspective how I referred to the hills. It's up to you how to regard them. Either the lower part, the lowest part because it is the lower part, or it's the most important part because the whole body stands on it. The final conclusion of this Kabbalistical overview is to tell you that the world goes according to a plan, and the plan is in the hands of God. And from the very beginning of time, since times of the creation, God has brought to the world souls that are needed according to that generation. According to the modern Kabbalists, the last generation, which is the generation of Hitler, who killed 6 million of our brothers, which is a question that cannot be answered no matter how we discuss it. But according to the Kabbalists, this was already written in that plan, that towards the end of the generations, the one that is before the last one will be the generation in which there is going to be an accumulation of souls who needed the tikkun of all the generations before. And that's why they went through a hellish time. And so many of them died and did not die according to our belief. They really did not die, but physically they died. And now we plunge into the last generation, which apparently still needs some of those souls that will be in this generation who will stand before even a tougher experience than the one before. The one before, according to the Kabbalists again, the one before, which means the time of the Second World War, in which we lost 6 million Jews, and the world lost another 40 million or 50 million people. Just Russia lost 20 million people, you know that. The world came to a certain conclusion. And now comes what we call the after conclusion. That which is needed also for some other souls to come that are going to make this generation, and it's making it already, tougher and harder to contend with than the one before. In which way? Can anything be worse than Hitler? Can anything be worse than that Gehinnom, that hell? Impossible. So what is the meaning? How do we see this generation? Even though this generation does not lack problems, terrorism, massacres, people die with famine by the millions, wars all the time. But still, this nobody will compare with the previous one. So in which way do we find that this one is the tougher? Is because of the nisayon, the test that we have to surmount in this generation. What is the test? For the Jewish people I'm talking. The test of this generation is the test of emunah, of belief, faith. The problems with Jewish faith started in the last generation and even prior to it. In the age, at that time when the age of the emancipation, it's called in Hebrew tenuata skala, when Jews started to open their eyes into the modern world, that's about 150 years ago, with the creation or whatever of the reform movement and so forth. When Jews started to depart from their heritage, the problem of lack of faith started. But it is coming now to such a crucial point that it is invested totally in a Jewish body. And it appears to us in the form, don't be disappointed to hear what I am going to say. It appears to us in the form of Medinat Israel, of the modern state of Israel. What I am saying is not me. Do I believe in what I am going to say? Yes, I believe in it with a certain reservation. But philosophically, I believe totally in it. The state of Israel is a miracle. Anyone who wants to ponder upon what happened and what's happening today would regard the state of Israel as one of the greatest miracles of all times. How from the ashes the Jews not only re-established themselves, but in something that did not happen for 2,000 years. 2,000 years is a long time. The world practically forgot about Jews having their own state. Unbelievable. And from where? It didn't even start with some system or some progressive time that would take several generations. It just started, chik-chak, immediately after coming, mamash, being alive from the ashes. Coming out of the ashes of Hitler. The state of Israel was born. You could always explain, well, listen, the nations, when they saw what happened to the Jews, So they decided to give them a piece of land. He could say anything you want, but God, as you know, covers his deeds in velour. He covers it with natural means, this way, to take away from you the possibility to see the hand of God, because God is not interested as to see with your eyes the hands of God. He wants you to see the hands of God with your mind, with your heart. So he puts gloves in whatever he does. And that's how we regard the United Nations, allowing the Jews to have their own state. But what kind of state? That state which used to be ours 2,000 years ago, our biblical state, the state of David HaMelech, the state of Shlomo, the state of Yehoshua bin Nun. That's ours more than any other part in the world. There is not one part in the world that belongs to anyone as this place, as the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. There is no greater justification to hold and to own a land to any nation in the world as the justification that the Jewish people has over its land. Because it is the only one that is definitely acknowledged by what? By the Bible itself, the book that is worshipped by all the nations. And yet, since its creation, we have problems after problems. It's not easy. It is true that the land of Israel was never easy for the Jewish people, except maybe 40 years here, 20 years there, in the time of the kings and the judges. But as I was saying before, we have plunged now into the final generation, we believe so, that generation which is represented or symbolized by the feet, by the heels of that body which started from the time of creation, culminating in the harshest time psychologically and philosophically. The biggest test that we have today is the test of faith. It is called in other terms the 50th level of either Kedusha, holiness, or impurity, Tumah, uncleanness. You see, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they have spent a long time in Egypt as slaves, and they practically forgot everything, and they even reached the highest level of impurity. That our sages said that if they waited a little longer, they wouldn't be able to get out. That's the reason why we celebrate Pesach, why we eat matzah, if you know the history of the Jewish people. Because the speed by which they came out from Egypt is the reason why we eat matzah, not bread. They didn't have the time. They couldn't wait for the dough to rise. So that's why they had to eat it dry before it rises, before it rose. And that's why we say, Bibhilu yatzanu mimitzrayim. I mean, speedily we came out. They didn't want to wait. Why? Because if they waited one more moment, they would be plunging into the final. The final step of impurity was the problem of faith. The Jewish people practically, they have done every single sin, but they still had a few here and there who still believed. But if they waited any longer, they could have lost that, and they wouldn't be able to come out. That 50th level is now the test of today. And it is, the core of this is in the land of Israel. The land of Israel, the state of Israel, was created by non-religious Jews, by atheists, not just non-religious. There is non-religious and non-religious. There are many non-religious Jews who believe in God, but they are not interested in practicing the religion properly. But the individuals who started, like Ben Gurion and all the first one, those brilliant people, they were all atheists. Even though I must say, maybe it's not fair, because they even, I remember when Ben Gurion when he came to Kotel HaMa'aravi in 1967 when it was captured. So Ben Gurion came also to the Kotel. I told you already about Moshe Dayan who wrote a little piece of paper in it. And Moshe Dayan also is known as one of the biggest atheists that we have. But he had a moment of belief. Maybe it's also a political gesture. Maybe, who knows. But I remember, I even mentioned this on the radio in Israel, that Ben Gurion, when he came to the Kotel, the first thing that happened was a Chabadnik came, a guy from Chabad, and he offered, Mr. Prime Minister, would you put that tefillin? And what was the reaction of Ben Gurion? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Who told you I didn't put my tefillin today? That you come to tell me to put that tefillin. That means the reasoning is that I didn't. Who told you that I didn't? So we never know. In reality, the truth is in the hearts of everyone, and we don't know exactly what's happening in the house of one. But the truth is that they were known as atheists, and it is known that the Jewish state started with atheists. Even today, we realize that so many Jews in Israel are pretending to say, we don't believe. They don't believe. No matter how many miracles happen, no matter how history is practically showing the extraordinary appearance of this Jewish state, yet so many Jews will tell you they don't believe. Why? Because the leaders are atheists. The leaders. This causes a lot of friction between the religious Jews and the non-religious Jews. The religious cannot believe that there is such a thing as a Jew who does not believe. So therefore they keep trying. Because they say it's impossible, there must be something there. And there is a certain verity to this psychology. This is a philosophy by itself. That many Jews, they like to say I don't believe when they truly refuse to say I believe. Because they don't want to believe, that's all. And that's why there is a big friction, however. And that's that part with which I will conclude the preface of the lecture of tonight, if we begin with it. There is another segment of the population of Israel that is also a big problem. So we said that there are many atheists. But many of those atheists, they pertain to that category of Jews. Before I tell you which category I am referring to, let's go back again to Egypt, to Mitzrayim, long time ago. As you know, this Shabbat we are going to begin the book of Shemot, which is the beginning of the Exodus of the Jewish people, going into Egypt, and then their liberation, and then going to become a new nation and receive the Torah at the mountain of Sinai. What happened when the liberation was imminent? Tremendous miracles, as we are going to read, the plagues falling upon the Egyptians, 10 plagues, ending with the death of the firstborn, Makat Bechorot. And then finally Pharaoh says, Kumu tseu mitochami, get out. And the Jews got out. Are they the only one who got out? There were many people who got out with them. You have to understand that for many generations no one succeeded to leave Egypt. Anyone from other nations who was into Egypt could never get out. And in most cases they were all slaves, because Egypt was such a society that did not tolerate other except in times of necessity. And if they were in, they were supposed to be either slaves or maybe mercenaries. When the Jewish people were given this magnificent Geula, redemption, they came out Berama, In other words, with haughtiness. They didn't run away like fugitives. They came out from Egypt with great honors. They came out like an army, the most successful army, led by Yehoshua and Moshe. But many people, according to a certain calculation of Rabbi Yonatan ben Uzziel, about 2,400,000 people joined the 3,600,000 people of the Jews. Real Jews were 3,600,000. According to some other opinions, less. The number is much less than that. But I am referring to the cheshbon of Yonatan ben Uzziel, who was known to be not only a great rabbi who lived about 2,200 years ago, but he was also considered a man of Ruach HaKodesh. And many of his predictions in the Bible came true. He translated the Bible into his vernacular, the Aramaic of his kind. And many of his sayings came true, à la lettre. In fact, he predicted the Holocaust. And he said 6 million Jews will be killed. You don't believe me, Marina? I'll show it to you. Only it's always uncovered with certain gloves to let those people, the people who like to always come up with their own opinions, to let them say whatever they want. So it's never clear, but it says almost to the clearest way that 6 million Jews are going to, at a certain time, they will have to perish. Again, nothing will justify this, not in my heart, not in the heart of anyone.
Is it coincidence that 6 million people came out?
Because 6 million people came out. That's according to the calculation of Yonatan ben Uzziel, who said that there were 3,600,000 Jews, descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who came out from Egypt, and 2,400,000 are from the non-Jews. And the Torah refers to them by the term Erev Rav, which it means, in English it would mean a mixture, a great number that mixed with the Jewish people. When they went along with the Jewish people after they saw the great miracles, there's no question about it that they didn't want to belong to any nation but the nation of Israel. Which means they followed the Jewish people to the mountain of Sinai with clear intention to become convert of the Jewish faith. Like you could, if you want, in the time of Rome and the time of Jesus. When Paul he couldn't go to the Jews. The Jews always, he couldn't find a way out, except maybe for a few. But he had no way to turn to the Jews. Jews were too smart for his ambitions. But he went to the pagans. Then in those times, in those ancient times, there was no Christianity, there was no other religions who believed in one supreme God, but there were people who worshipped idols, all kinds of idols, all kinds of forces. Forces of the sun, the moon, the water, the earth, all kinds of what we call Avodah Zarah. Or animals, like the lamb, the Egyptians worshipped the lamb, and so forth. The Nachash, the serpent. But Paul, when he went to them, they were very easy targets, because the world started to understand that this is shtuyot, that this is sheer stupidity. So they were looking for some kind of valid religion. So Paul he seized the occasion to come to the pagans and to tell them, come and become Jews. But they said, we cannot, how can we become Jews? Judaism requires circumcision, requires to eat kosher food. So he said to them, you know what, just come. We'll let you belong to us without circumcision, without netilat yadayim, without kosher food. And that was the story of Paul. And then little by little it was, of course, proven that this is not Judaism that he is offering. I'm not interested now to give more details about this, because that's not what is of our interest. So the Jewish people left Egypt with a massive population that belonged to other nations that integrated into the Jewish nation. When they stood at the mountain of Sinai, all of them saw what they saw, and after the giving of the Torah, we had 6 million Jews made of those factions. The Kabbalah says that those who joined the Jewish people, they joined out of pressure, because they had no other way. I mean, you were liberated, you came out with the Jewish people. The Jewish people has proven itself to be a nation of God, so therefore we belong to you. That's not very much in the way that pleases God. That's not what pleases also the Jewish people. The Jewish people were always worried about this kind of people. Anyway, they integrated within the Jewish people, and now they gave birth and so forth, and there is no more distinction. But there remains one distinction since time immemorial until today. Today we have the result of those Erev Rav. Usually when a Jew does not believe in God at all, when he proclaims to be a non-believer, when he proclaims to be a Mechalel Shabbat without having, at least if he does it, he let him do it at home and no one sees him, but he does it with force, then we always have the suspicion that he probably comes from that category which we call Erev Rav. So the Kabbalists tell us that the last generation before the Mashiach will have to deal with the problems that come from Erev Rav, from that mixture. Because you have to understand, even though it happened 3,300 years ago, that doesn't mean that the effect is gone. The effect is always. The genes are transmitted from one generation to another. And those who went with the Jewish people without really the feeling of Jewishness will always remain this way. Of course, there were many of them who became true Jews. I mean, Rabbi Akiva himself came from converts. And we should be proud to say that we are the children of Rabbi Akiva. But I'm talking about that category which was always problematic for the Jewish people. Like, for example, 2,000 years ago, one faction of the Jewish people separated itself. It's called the Sadducees. We did explore this subject. There were one part of the Jewish people consisting of 10%, apparently, that did not want to believe in the Talmud, in the oral law, and they made problems for the Jewish people, which consisted of 90% of Pharisees, the Prushim. This is the real Jewish people. History taught us with whom the right was. Those who remain Jews as up to today have proven to be the right ones. But those who have disappeared completely because of their philosophy have proven to be the wrong ones. Is it logical? So the Sadducees disappeared completely 2,000 years ago. But before they disappeared, they afflicted too many casualties to the Jewish people. But now, at least, like one of the rabbis said, at least, even though they destroyed the temple 2,000 years ago, but at least we have gotten rid of the Sadducees. Sadducees were no more. Those who were still alive became Christian. So you see what happens to the guy who believes only in the written Torah but does not believe in the oral Torah? So it is very possible that many of them came from that which we call Erev Rav, the mixture that left Egypt together with the Jewish people and intertwined with them. So the Kabbalists say that this generation before the Mashiach, the biggest test will be the test of faith. And the biggest battle will be against the Erev Rav. What battle? What fight? We are not talking about a physical fight. We are talking about a psychological fight, if you wish. Ideological. But mostly a matter of faith, who believes, who does not. The modern Kabbalists say, and also you could include among them the Chazon Ish, who was not a Kabbalist, at least he was not proclaimed to be a Kabbalist, but he was the greatest Torah mind of the Jewish world in the last century. He lived approximately 60 years ago in Bnei Brak. That's the Chazon Ish. His name is Rabbi Avraham Horvitz. Rabbi Avraham Horvitz, yes. Anyway, he is known by his book. His book is the Chazon Ish. When they came to Chazon Ish and they asked him about the time of the Mashiach, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, he said to them, we still have to go through the final stage. And the final stage, because you have to understand, we went through 4 kinds of exiles. We discussed this in the past. The first exile was the exile of the the Egyptian exile. Then came the second exile, the Babylonian exile. Then the third one was the Greek Syrian, the Greek exile. Then came the Persian exile. The final exile was to be Edom, Rome. We did go through it, but it did not come to an end yet. Because now the biggest exile of all is lurking at us. And that is the Yishmael, the Galut Yishmael. The exile of Yishmael, the Galut Yishmael, in the eyes of the great Kabbalists, especially by Rabbi Chaim Vital, the famed Talmid of Ari HaKadosh, the great teacher of Kabbalah, who lived 400 years ago, 450 years ago. So he says that Galut Yishmael will be the harshest. The Chazon Ish says that the harshest, he calls it exile, but it's not exile. The harshest test will be with the harshest battle will be the battle against the Erev Rav. But the real war will be with Ishmael. But then not only the Jewish people will fight Ishmael, the whole world will fight Ishmael. But then they will turn against us. So far, this is what we have to deal with today. So today we have 2 problems. And that's why today is considered the harshest test and the most crucial problem. The problem of faith, atheism versus faith, and Ishmael versus the world and the Jewish people. Always the Jewish people seems to be on the side, but in fact it is the crux. It is the center of all the activities. Always. Amazing. Unfortunately, the state of Israel, hopefully it will be given life and success, amen. It is demonstrating itself as a state of the Jews that represents mostly irreligious Jews. So the Chazon Ish says that's modern state of Israel, Erev Rav. Not all, but those who lead, those who are the leaders, the first ones will come from the Erev Rav. And who were the first ones who created, so to speak, the modern state of Israel? It's not that they created. They were Jews. They were religious Jews in Israel, in Palestine, before it became the modern state of Israel. But when you look upon Herzl, start with Herzl. It's a terrible story. And yet, we're supposed to talk only good things about Herzl. And you could call him again, here we're talking about, you spoke before about people of predictions and prophecies. I mean, Herzl is considered by the non-religious faction of the Jewish people, that is, of course, the Zionist, the non-religious Zionist. They call Herzl the visioner, the prophet of modern days. That he is the one who prophesied about who predicted the creation of the modern state of Israel, as you know. But the problem is that when you look into the books that tell us about the history of Herzl, you'll find out that Herzl didn't care which land it is. He was ready to accept Uganda as a state, as a state of Israel. And no wonder his own son became non-Jewish and married non-Jewish woman on the day of the yahrzeit of his father. Anyway, the case of Herzl is quite clear by us. And yet, if you travel between Tel Aviv and Herzliya, you will see the famed idol or statue of Herzl, which to my humble opinion is definitely not fair. But whatever it is, especially that he had a nice beard. הוא היה תלמיד ישיבה, אתה אומר? זקנה הישיבה הזאת. There were many people who came out from the yeshiva as the worst kind of atheists. Amazing. Many of the reform, I told you once that I met a rabbi here in America, in upstate New York. I met a reform rabbi. I went to check some of the Sifrei Torah that they had. And I went into the office of that rabbi, and I saw the rabbi eating non-stop and without a kippah. It is a reform temple, fine. So I started to discuss with him. I wanted to see this Abel.
But Torah is kosher, they have or no?
They had the non-kosher Torah that had to be fixed. But what's the difference by them? It's not. They wanted only an estimate. So I went into the office, and little bit I engaged him into a conversation to find out. And he revealed to me that he was very old then, and very sick. And he said that he was a student of Slobodka Yeshiva. Slobodka, from Slobodka Yeshiva came the best elements of the Jewish people today, of the greatest rabbis, like the Mir Yeshiva and all the famed leaders of the Mir Yeshiva came from Slobodka Yeshiva. That guy came out from the Yeshiva of Slobodka directly into the world of the worst kind for the Jewish people. And he became a reform rabbi. At least what he learned in the yeshiva helped him to become a rabbi, somehow. It's a big story with it, but that's not the issue. The state of Israel, Hashem helped that in the hands of people like that who were completely entire religious. It's not like today when more or less religion is tolerated. I'm talking about the worst, the most vicious kind to our religion are the ones who started the Jewish state, the modern state of Israel. It's amazing. If you check into them, you will see that they were entire religious, not just non-religious. I mean, just to begin the state of Israel by opening non-religious schools for the children is tantamount to a house of slaughter to the Jew. What did you expect, Ribono Shel Olam, when you opened the state of Israel by opening something that never happened in the past? Batei Sefer Chiloniyim, non-religious schools. Anybody with his right mind, when he starts taking care of the child, you know what will be the result after a few years, depending on what you gave him, what you invested in him. They took them, the children of Israel, the tender minds of the Jewish children of Israel, who came and believed so much to anybody who was in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, and they took them to kibbutzim, and they took them to non-religious schools to learn anything that has to do against Judaism. I want you to understand that I am not very Haredi, as you might consider me hearing me talking this way. But I always specify the fact that I see reality as it is, and I look at it logically. And logically talking, the biggest crime that ever happened, that ever was committed against the Jewish people, was the early children of the modern state of Israel. which is the reason why we lost 5 generations. That's why you see today Jews who came from Israel. Thank God many of them are returning, by the way. Many of them are coming to and becoming more religious. But if you see the Israeli kind who come and he is not religious, you will see that this is the type that is the worst kind for our tradition, for our heritage, for our identity. How can you be against your own heritage? When a person is mechalel Shabbat, when a person does not keep Shabbat openly, he doesn't care. I'm not talking about those who do not keep Shabbat because of ignorance or because they were not taught. I'm talking about a guy who knows everything and he doesn't care and he defies his own identity. Unbelievable. This has to do with something that has nothing to do with Jewish source. Real Jewish source will never deny itself from his own identity. A real descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, no matter how lost he is, he will always find his way back. It might take many generations, it might take 1,000 years, but his soul will come back and he will find again the way. That's why so many people today, over 1 million Jews that are Tshuva people. You know, the Tshuva movement, the people who came back to their heritage is growing in such numbers that is definitely causing a real anxiety to the people whom I am talking about. But the people who came from the Erev Rav, even though many of them will also find their way and will be good Jews, but those who do not relent always against anti-Jewishness, they are a direct effect and result of their past. That their past, they were Erev Rav. And today, we have a nice population in the state of Israel that are from this faction that we call Erev Rav. Remember this expression, Erev Rav, the mixture. That's when you see Jews who are against with passion. When you see them with passion like Barak. I'm sorry, I'm not afraid to say it. I told you, I'm not so much Haredi, not very religious to the point of Hasidic or something. But I am a man who looks upon reality with logic. Logic tells me that, for example, one example is Barak today, the Sar HaBitachon of Israel, General Barak. It's terrible what he does. It is just terrible. He is killing his own identity. And you heard, of course, what he did a few weeks ago, that he dismantled the whole yeshiva in Har Bracha, and so forth, the yeshiva of the Mitnachalim, of those who are in those sections that we call the pioneers of those places that were conquered, so to speak, which they are planning to give back. Which is also another atheistical point. Because if you believe, then at least leave it to God. Why should you interfere with this movement that is so heroic and so great? I'm talking about the Mitnachalim and the Bnei Akiva movement. I'm not Bnei Akiva, you see. I am proving to you that I am, despite the fact that I am not a Bnei Akiva, and I'm more towards the Orthodox movement, not the Bnei Akiva movement, and yet I tell you, if we have any courageous people, any brave hearts, and any wonderful Jews, those are the people who are there. Even though I am not one of them. Because that's the truth. They are the ones who protect our frontiers, and they are the ones that now modern state of Israel is going vehemently against them and openly in such a way as if they were our vicious enemies. And to the point that they find now that the Shabbat is harsher towards the Mitnachalim, those who are in those places, such as, in Hebron and all the other places. They regard them as worse than the real enemies. As Abu Mazen and all the Palestinians whom we know they are lying to us openly every day, talking about shalom, and we know what they have in their minds, as has been already predicted, that shalom and shalom l'Arshaim, there is no such a thing as a peace. You don't believe me? You will see. Wait and see that there will never be peace with them. So to whom are you going to give back those lands of Eretz Israel. Those are the real lands of the land of Israel. You are going to give it back to whom? To people who are going again to pursue you, harass you, terrorize you, bombard you again and again. You silly people. Unfortunately, Hashem still allows it, because the state of Israel is in the hands of mostly Erev Rav. And that has been predicted by the Kabbalists long time ago, by the Zohar HaKadosh, by not so long ago, such as Reb Chaim Vital 400 years ago, and today also with the Kabbalists of today, as well as the great names such as the Chafetz Chaim and the Chazon Ish, who lived about 60 years ago, 75 years ago, and they all said those things. When they said them, they were even afraid to say those words, because they would tell them, you don't believe. How can you say that? These people are the real Mashiach. And now we have to admit the truth. As I told you before, my great uncle Rabbi Baruch Toledano was the only rabbi in Morocco who used to go from one synagogue to synagogues to tell them, don't go, to stop them, and he was hated because of that. And at the end, all those rabbis before have disappeared. Their children are not known. Where the children of Rabbi Baruch Toledano, they count by the thousands. They are the biggest rabbis of Israel. They built the most marvelous yeshivot in the land of Israel, because their grandpa was the courageous and brave heart who did not fear anyone, and going from one place to another to warn them about the dangers, the spiritual dangers of the modern state of Israel. Don't get me wrong, my friends. It doesn't mean that, I told you, I lost my own brother to the state of Israel, so I cannot deny the fact that I love the state of Israel, and I pray for it day and night, all the time. I pray, and besides, that's where our families are. All our families and friends, everyone is there. So how can I deny that to myself or to my family? And we inculcate that love and affection that we have towards the modern state of Israel to our own children, who are being raised in the Haredi yeshivot, such as the Mirer Yeshiva and so forth, who are not so much for the state of Israel, as you know. At the same time, we believe that the exile of the Erev Rav is coming also to an end in two forms. One form that is the most hopeful for us is that they are doing teshuvah, and once they do teshuvah, the status of Erev Rav is finished. You understand? That's how we remove that status that we call Erev Rav. Erev Rav, the mixture. The mixture comes to an end once the individual does teshuvah and comes back again to his heritage, or accepts the heritage of the Jewish people by vocation, by love and understanding. When even a non-Jew comes and he says, I love the Jewish Torah and I love the Jewish mitzvot and I want to practice them, he is accepted, and not only accepted, but he is given the biggest respect and the biggest love. As I told you many times, the Torah warns us about loving each other with one commandment, as it says, ve'ahavta lere'acha kamocha. That's one commandment. You have to love your brother, your fellow Jew, like yourself. But when it's talking about the converts, people who convert from other nations, and they want to become Jewish, but the right way, the real way, then twice the Torah repeats itself, ve'ahavte metager. Not only you have to respect him, but you have to show him love. You have to love him very much. And that's the point. Which means the Judaism is not against foreign people. No. On the contrary, that's not. Only the Jewish Judaism will not go after people to bring them. That's the difference between Judaism and other religions. Other religions forced their religion upon others. The Jewish nation never forced Judaism upon anybody. Can you force someone to accept a diamond? Whom do you force to accept something? If you give him crap. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if you give him something and you tell him, then you have to force him to accept. But if you give him a diamond, you have to force him. Let him come and beg you to have it. That's exactly the mashal of the... We don't force anybody to become Jewish. There's no such, it's against. But once he becomes Jewish and he proves himself, then we are under the obligation to love him or her, to respect him. And we have to be very careful not to cause him ona'ah. Ona'ah means not to hurt or insult him. If anybody insults someone who converted to Judaism, he's a criminal in our eyes. Unfortunately, many people, out of lack of character, they cause all kinds of problems like this. But the truth is, it's against the Torah, because the Torah twice commanded us that you have to love ahavtem et hager. Only the condition is that the convert must accept the mitzvot, and he cannot say, I am a Jew, and then profane the Shabbat, chas v'shalom. That's the point. So as I said, we are now going into this, very much into the generation of Erev Rav. Erev Rav is one problem. We have to deal with this situation. This situation is little by little clearing itself away. People are becoming more religious. Baruch Hashem. But there is too much irreligion, too much anti-religion yet to contend with. And hopefully Hashem will do something that... There is a certain midrash that tells us that 3 days before the Mashiach comes, Eliyahu Navi will come. And Eliyahu Navi the prophet will come, he will appear, and he will come to all those who did not accept the Torah to convince them to accept the Torah. 3 days. Now again we learn that 3 days in the eyes of Kabbalah are not the 3 days that we understand. Who knows what it means? But let's hope it means exactly 3 days. If that's the case, then Be'ezrat Hashem, hopefully everyone will do Teshuvah. And again, Jewish people will be reunited around the Torah, around our marvelous traditions and things, and around the families. I would like to conclude with the following. Last week I began with a word about the parasha of Vaychi. Now I would like to conclude with Parashat Shemot, having to do with what we said. As usual, I did not even mention one word of whatever I prepared for tonight. But that's an important... Anyway, it was going to be in the future lecture. The Erev Rav talk was going to be in it. So there's no difference, so might as well be as an introduction to the continuation of these lectures. Because Erev Rav, that mixture of Jews that started from that time, from the redemption of the Jews from Egypt, the effect is still with us today. And that's where we see the Jews who are against their own heritage. That's how we should keep in mind as to what is the meaning of Erev Rav. And we have to contend with the galut, with the exile of Erev Rav, at the same time to worry about Yishmael, which is proving to be the most dangerous exile of all the exiles that we went through. It's the most cruel, the most stupid, and yet the most farouche. They don't care about death. And all this is written in the books. It's amazing. All this is written. The Zohar HaKadosh is talking about 2,000 years ago. It already wrote so much about Yishmael, the coming of Yishmael, and the practical control of the world by Yishmael. We see that in many parts of the modern world. It's unbelievable. So the Jewish people has to contend this generation with those two problems. The problem of Erev Rav within, and the problem of Ishmael from the outside. And that makes this generation, the test of this generation, harsher even than the previous one, the Hitleric time. Harsher. It is very possible that it will not come to a bad end. The Mashiach either way will come. He is coming either way. And it depends on us how he will come. Will he come in a violent way, or he will come in a respectable way? Either way he will come, but again depending on how we change. Today they asked the the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who lived, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who lived more than 400 years ago. And they asked him, what's going to be, are we going to have some hope in this very dangerous generation? And make no mistake about it, it's a very dangerous, there was never in the past a generation as dangerous as this generation. You don't believe that? Absolutely. Do you know, my friends, chas v'shalom, God forbid, it could happen any minute that an explosion, an atomic explosion will occur. And who knows how many will die. Hashem Yishmor. We live in this kind of generation. And I'm not talking about Israel. I'm talking about America. I'm talking any part of the world. We live now in that kind of generations in which the writings are replete with descriptions of the most memorable and the most dangerous situations that will be in the last generation. That is the generation before the Mashiach. For which, as I told you, if you remember, the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin tells us, Ula Amar Yete vela Achmine. There were rabbis 2,000 years ago who knew everything that's going to be today. And they said, we prefer not to be in that time. Now, some say because they were afraid of the danger. But most of the Mefarshim explain that they were not afraid of the danger. They were afraid of the nisyonot, the tests. And what kind of test? The emunah test. Belief. Do we belong to those who believe in God, who believe in the Torah, who believe in the Chachamim, in the sages of the Jewish people, who believe in the tradition of the Mashiach and everything, who believe in the future of the Jewish people, that there will be again Bet HaMikdash, that there will be again Rechovot Meleim Ho-Ho, that all the streets will be full of Jews who pray with talitot outside, there's no room in the synagogues and so forth. And those who believe in the other side. So both of them exist. Both factions exist today. And Yerachem Hashem, hopefully, we will see that eventual dream of the Jewish people, that the Jewish people will be finally united, but not always divided by philosophical ideas and ideals. That's the point. So I discussed last week, I started by saying Vaychi Yaakov, if you remember. The Parasha of Vaychi told us that Nistemu Enehem Velibam Shel Israel, that the eyes of the Jewish people were closed. That's why the parasha was closed. Remember that little piece? What happened really? So our sages said that the eyes of Israel were closed because of the beginning of the slavery. So we asked the question, if you remember, what slavery? When Yaakov Avinu died, was no slavery yet. I mean, the slavery began only after the last of the brothers passed away. And Levi was the last brother, if you remember. And only then began some kind of slavery, which eventually became a very harsh one. But it took at least 100 years since the passing of Yaakov Avinu to the beginning of the slavery of the Jews in Egypt. So that's when, so we said, what kind of slavery are we talking about? So we told you that we are talking about two kinds of slavery. There is a slavery of the mind, spiritual slavery, and there is the slavery of the body. The slavery of the body did not start yet, of course, as we said. But as soon as the Yaakov Avinu passed away, our father Jacob passed away, the father figure passed away. And now the eyes of Israel were clogged. Which means, you know what happens when the father is alive? The whole family is following the father. All of them were traditional. When the father passes away, the family is free to go whichever any direction they choose. Unfortunately, it happened also to our ancestors. As long as Yaakov Avinu was alive, the Jews were Jews in the midst of Egypt. As soon as he passed away, their eyes were clogged. By what? Well, Egyptian society, like American society. Everything now is theirs. There is no father who supervises them. And you know who is the father? The father is the eyes of the family. Margareta, you might think it's the mother. It's not true. I will explain. Of course, the mother is the body of the family. That is true. But the eyes and the heart of the family is the father. Normally, people will consider the mother to be compassionate, right? The compassion is the woman. The violence and the arrogance is the father. It's not true. The compassion of the mother is natural. The compassion of the father is more constructive. Let me give you an example. You will agree with me, I am sure. It is true that the woman is more compassionate. But the Torah does not regard the woman as compassionate versus the father. It says, Kerachem av al banim. You know this pasuk? Kerachem av al banim. As the father has the compassion towards his children. Why it doesn't say Kerachem em al banim, like the compassion of the mother to the children? It's because the compassion of the father is more constructive. The compassion of the mother is more natural. Like, let's say, for example, let's say the child, you have to wake him up in the morning to go to shul. So you say, hey, Reuven, get up. But it's snowing outside. It's so cold outside. So the mother immediately wakes up. Oh, come on, husband. Let him sleep today. It's so cold. That's compassion. That's natural compassion. But is it really compassion? If you are thinking about the future of the child, then the father is the cry of the father is compassion. Because the father is thinking about the child. He is the one who insists on his success. Therefore he says, get up. Snow or not, get up. The mother says, please leave him alone. It's cold. Oh yeah, that's compassion. But that's not compassion in the eyes of the Torah. So the father is known as Eino velibo shel hamishpacha. The eyes and the heart. The heart means the thinking machine of the human being. And the eyes is the father. The eyes, because he's the father's obligation is to look what's going on. Everything is okay. That's the father. I'm talking about the traditional father. I'm not talking about today, where everything is mixed up. I'm talking about the regular traditional father. He is the one in charge of inspecting everything. And the woman is on this end, always trying to find something to show her compassion. And that's life. That's the world. The world is built on such ways. When Yaakov Avinu passed away, our sages said, Nistemu enehem velibam shel Israel. The eyes and the heart of Israel, of the children of Yaakov, were closed. Which means there's no more eyes and there is no more heart of a father that usually supervises. And that's why they fell into one kind of slavery, the slavery of society. Egypt. They were in Egypt, they started to forget their traditions. Little by little, they forgot their traditions, and that's how they became mamash, almost totally ignorant of everything. And that's when began Sarat HaShi'abud. That's when the physical slavery started, which is exactly what's happening throughout the history of the Jewish people. The Jewish people starts forgetting Hashem. Something happened, like it happened in the time of Esther and Mordechai. What happened in the time of Esther? You know, Shoshana Bira and Persia was a heaven for the Jews. They were rich, villas, Al Naharot Babel, Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. I mean, Rabbi Avigdor Miller used to say, Al Naharot Babel, on the river, on the edge of the river of Babylon. Who can live on the edge of the river? Only the rich one who has villas surplumbing the beautiful sight of the river of Babylon. And the Jews, they live there in Babylon in great luxury. And yet, what caused the coming back of the Jews 2,000 years ago to the land of Israel? Because it lasted, the exile lasted only for 70 years. Why so short? Because Jews, despite the fact that they were very prosperous, they never forgot. Al Naharot Babel Sham Bachinu Gam Yashavnu. They still, when they remembered Zion, the land of Israel, they were crying. Today you don't see the Jews in America crying over the fact that there is no Israel or something. You know, I'm talking about before the state of Israel started. The Jews felt good in their society and everything, and they forgot everything. Only there are Jews and there are Jews, no question about it. In the time of Egypt, that's what happened. There was first the slavery of their spirituality, which was immediately followed by about 100 years later, by the physical slavery. This Shabbat we are going to begin with what we call Ve'ele Shemot Bnei Israel Habba'im Mitzrayma Et Yaakov Ish Ubeto Ba'u. How did the Jewish people go to Egypt in the time of Yosef? Together with Yaakov. So all the family was united around the father. Ish Ubeto Ba'u. When the father passed away, it was a different situation. And that's what caused, as a result, the physical slavery. One more word I will tell you. We started this lecture by saying it's a pity that America, remember we started before we started officially the lecture, but it's so unfortunate that such a beautiful country, America, so great, so beautiful in every point of view. But now we are looking upon America as now a little bit distancing itself from Israel. I say that this is a big mistake that America is doing. Because, let me prove it to you in one single point from this week's parasha. This week's parasha, it says that when the Jews were in Egypt, after the death of Yaakov and after the death of Yosef, then vayirbu, vayatzmu, vayifru, bim'od me'od, they became, they populated the land of Egypt, they procreated by leaps and bounds. They had children, 6 children in each womb. Unbelievable. In no time they became a very, very numerous population. And then what happened? Then they started to worry. In Egypt, the leaders started to worry. Number one, Vayakom Melech Hadash al Mitzrayim. A new king was in Egypt, a new pharaoh. Forgot Yosef. That's according to the Pshat. And they started to look upon the Jewish people as becoming very problematic. And they were having millions of them inside. They were very advanced, progressive people. All the blessings that you could imagine are coming from this nation. But they found them to be a problem. And what is the problem? If you look in the Bible, you will see that here is what it says. The king Paro joined with all his advisors. Let's discuss the situation of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are among us. It's a big problem. What's the problem? This is a population that brings a blessing upon you, right? What does it say? It says the following. Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim. A new king came upon Egypt. Asher lo yada et Yosef. He didn't know Yosef. Vayomer el amo. He addressed his people and he said, Hine am bnei Israel rav ve'atzum mimenu. Wow! This nation Israel, they came only 70 of them, and now they count in the millions. They are practically more powerful than us. Rav ve'atzum mimenu. Hava nitchakema lo. Let's find some kind of stratagem. Let's gather our ideas to solve the problem of the Jewish problem. Penirbe. Now, if you watch this pasuk, I find it personally extremely enigmatic. Impossible to understand it. Look. What was their worry? Their anxiety was Penirbe. Wow, it's going to become even more numerous. One day they will count in the millions. And what will happen? והיה כי תקרנה מלחמה ונוסף גמו על שונאינו ונלחם בנו ועלה מן הארץ. What does it say? Here is, if I explain literally, it would mean this. And now we have to find a solution against these people because they are becoming numerous, very many of them. What happened if we have a war against any nation? They are going to join our enemies, They will fight us, and ve'ala min ha'aretz. And then they will leave us.
Fifth colony.
What's going on? You're afraid of these people among you. Instead of citing the good things and benefits that you get from them, you are worried that maybe they will betray you, they will join your enemies, and then, not that they will kill you, not they were worried that, they will become but they will join our enemies and then they will win the war. He didn't say that. Or that they will kill us or something. He didn't say that. He says, if they join our enemies, then they will leave us. Does it make sense? I mean, he should say that they will fight us and kill us, or become the masters of the country. No, instead their worry, what was their fear? That the Jews might leave us. Now, this is unbelievable. On one hand, they are afraid that there will become too many of them, and they will be against them, and then the real fear is that they will leave us. But how can you start a pasuk saying that you are afraid of them as a body that is against, and yet you want them to stay with you? That's exactly the story of the Jews in all the countries, in all the generations. Amazing. In the last 2,000 years, this is exactly what happened. They hated us, they killed us, they were always trying to imagine all kinds of things about us. Jews, they control the monies. Jews, they control the media. Jews, they control this. Okay, if you hate us so much, do what Spain did. At least Spain, out of their religion, what they did, in 1492, they told the Jews, get out. That was unbelievable. That was because of a certain politic but the problem is because their politic was that he should become a Christian. But here, they didn't say we want them to be Egyptians. We want them to stay with us. Which means we want to hate them. We want to be against them. We want to subdue them. But at the same time, we don't want to get rid of them. So since time immemorial, the biggest fear of the nations is that the Jews should leave them. The Jews, they want to control the Jews, but they want the Jews to stay. Because on one hand, they know that the Jews is a bracha. Like the Torah says, Baruch tihye mikol ha'amim, the nation of Israel is a blessed nation. In the history is replete with facts that wherever Jews lived, they brought only prosperity to that land. You know, Spain, as I told you many times before, was the biggest empire 500 years ago, was the biggest empire in the world. Because for at least 700 to 800 years, Jews lived there with full prosperity. When the wave changed, and in 1492, Isabella, the wife of Ferdinand, the king of Spain, who was very, very orthodox in the Christian. So she said Jews must become Christian or leave. Jews, of course, refused. They had to leave. And since then what happened? Then Spain became minuscule. Became a little dot of nothing. Could be a beautiful country, but doesn't make much noise. Since then, where is the big armada of Spain? Where is the empire? I mean, it was an empire. It was the ruler of many nations in the world. There's no more. Spain is Spain, and that's it. Hardly full of Moroccan Arabs today. You go there, all you see is the Arabs from Morocco. I was in Spain a few years ago. I was invited there. I spent a whole week as a guest of the Jewish community. All I saw, wherever I went, I heard the Arab that I understand, Moroccan. I said, oh my God, this is what happened to Spain? This is the splendor of Spain. Since they got rid of the Jews, they lost the blessing. Today they say that the king of his wife has her Hebrew teacher is a rabbi. He's a friend of mine, Rabbi Garson. And he's the chief rabbi of Spain, and he is the personal teacher of the queen, the wife of the king of Spain, who in secret she wants to become Jewish. Jews, let me conclude, my friends. It says, Am Israel beracha la'olam. The Jewish people is a blessing to the world. But the problem is that the blessing of the Jews is their curse also. That's exactly the problem. Jews, they have the tendency to make a place very blessed and successful. But then jealousy sets in, and hatred, natural hatred sets in, and then that's the problem. But if the world, let me conclude with this, the world does not realize what it loses by affecting Israel. They don't learn from mistakes of the past. That's the message that we would like to release to America, our beautiful America. Don't make that mistake. Because if you make that mistake, then America will not be anymore America as we know it. But rather, as perhaps the name America hints. In Hebrew, or rather in Aramaic, America, you know what's America? Ammareka. What is Ammareka? Empty nation. Unfortunately, America is the most beautiful country in the world today, and the most beneficent, and the most tolerant. But if it makes the mistake to go against Israel, it might do great harm to itself. And we don't want that to happen to America, because it already happened in the history of Spain, England, and all the nations which had big Jewish populations. When they turned against them, like they said, like Doctor, you said before Hitler, they already predicted that Germany is going to lose everything. And Germany didn't begin to pay yet. It will have to pay for what it did to our nation. But what happened to our nation is also in the plan of the book of God. And right now we are playing the biggest part of that plan. Because in that plan, the last part of the exiles is the time of Yishmael. And the time of Yishmael has come. And did you see how it came? Suddenly, overnight. Do you remember how it started? All that's happening today, does anybody know how it started? Do you know anything about Al-Qaeda? Who knows anything about Al-Qaeda? Did you ever hear this question that I am going to pose to you? What have we done to Al-Qaeda? What did anybody do against Al-Qaeda? What do they want from us? Not from us Jews, from the world. What do they want? All they want now is killing everywhere. No matter how much you kill of them, again. But who are they? Who are you people? And what do you want for us? What have we done to you? It's all a mystery. And it all started from nowhere, suddenly. Exactly as predicted in the Zohar, in the books of Kabbalah, long time ago, up to today. Mamash. One case after another. It's all true, and we see it with our own eyes as happening today. So therefore, we have to conclude this way. As we see today things that absolutely have no connection, and it happened overnight. You could also believe in what we said last week, that overnight the world will come to its senses. It will take one day, and the world will come to its senses, finding out that there is no religion but the religion that says Shema Israel Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Good night, my friends.